Tarun helpfully teaches Rust to newbies who start out and must learn the concepts, the tools, and the various rules until their own experience they trust.
Hello everyone, my name is Sarun, and in today's piecing together Rust talk, we'll cover the basic principles basic principles and tools used to get started with Rust without having to do it the hard way. So first let me introduce myself. My name is Sarun. I'm an engineer at Buoyant. We are the makers of Linkerd, which is a cloud-native computing foundation incubated service mesh project. Previously, I was an intern at CNCF. Primarily, on my day-to-day job, I work on Golang. That is the control plane side of things of a service mesh. But we are pretty much involved in the Rust ecosystem because our proxy is written in Rust to be ultra lightweight and obvious other choosing Rust reasons. Uh, I also try to contribute to some open source projects in Rust, like the tracing project, etc. So I recently passed the whole getting started curve with Rust, so I thought I'll share my learning so that it could be easier for the other folks. So now let's get started. This talk is essentially divided into three stages: installation, compilation, and debugging. Let's first see the installation phase. Uh, Rust has a great installation experience. Like once you get the Rustup tool, you can use that to install multiple variants of the compiler, etc. So what is Rustup? Rustup is essentially a toolchain multiplexer. So it allows you to install and manage multiple variations of toolchains. What is a Rust toolchain? A Rust toolchain is a package it could be considered like a package which consists of multiple components like Rust C, the compiler, the cargo, Rust FFmpeg, all the tools that make the Rust programming language essentially. Uh, each toolchain is like a package, and you have multiple variants of these packages. One type of variants is the channels. So Rust has three different release cycles: the stable, beta, nightly, and these have releases. The stable release happens every 6 weeks. The beta happens before every stable release, and there are nightly releases too. So we'll see an example. So using Rustup toolchain install, I was able to hear using Rustup toolchain install. You can install specific version of the toolchain. Right? Like here example, you're trying to install the nightly toolchain. Once you do that, that toolchain is installed into your local package, but it's still not the one that you'll use when you run Cargo or any other Rust tool. So you will use the Rustup default command to make that as the default. So Rust internally uses symlinks etc. to make whenever you run Cargo, it chooses the correct toolchain. I mean the default toolchain. So it's like a multiplexer, right? So that's what Rustup is. So now let's talk about the compilation phase, which is the most important in my opinion, especially because Rust is famous for its compilation capabilities, like the borrow checker, etc. So first we'll talk about formatting and linting. Formatting. So for formatting, Rust provides a tool called the Rust FMT tool, which allows you to style uh, your Rust code based on the official Rust style guideline. It whenever you run Cargo FMT, it runs the Rust FMT tool internally and fixes all your code to follow the same style guideline. This is very useful for to have all the projects across the ecosystem to be in a similar format, to be in the same format for the developers to be able to easily read and understand them without having to figure out stuff and how things are styled. Obviously, next we'll talk about the linting capabilities. So Rust also has a tool called Rust Clippy, which finds common mistakes and also code paths where it can be improved. It has over 400 lints included, and these include perf improvements, correctness bugs, to have idiomatic Rust code to make your code simpler, etc. These are pretty awesome, and I highly suggest you to have Clippy in your CI or at least in your development workflow so that you can find common bugs or common improvements. We'll see an example here. So here I have an example where we have a variable called I, which is initialized to 0, and then we have a while loop that depends on the variable. But inside the while loop, we are not updating the variable, so it is mostly an infinite loop, right? Now you can run this code and it will run. But if you have Clippy, if you run Cargo Clippy, it errors out telling you that the variable that the while loop depends on is not being updated or mutated. So it's pretty intelligent in itself and finds like many other better lints than this one. So I highly recommend you to check out that tool. Next, we'll talk about the IDE experience. IDE experience for any language is very important because it makes the developer job easier and helps him focus on the logic rather than on the language. So for Rust, we have Rust Analyzer, which is the which is a relatively new tool compared to others. But so it is a language server protocol implementation for the Rust language. So language server protocol is a pretty common open source is a pretty widely popular open source protocol that allows your multiple compiler front ends like Vim, etc., to use a common language server for so that the language servers don't have to be built for each compiler or IDE essentially. So all these compilers talk to the same language server using the language server protocol, so that one language server can be used with many other IDs, etc. So using a language server, you essentially get IntelliSense, refactoring, etc. on any of your favorite editors. This is pretty awesome, like having to be able to go to definition, finding references, etc. Previously, there was already a tool in Rust called the RLS, which was doing the same job, but it was very slow especially for bigger projects, especially because it runs the cargo compiler, the full cargo compile on every chain. So that is pretty hard, right? And it gets a JSON document and then it compares that to understand how to do things. But as you know, for bigger projects, pretty problematic. So Rust Analyzer instead leverages on-demand code analysis and also incremental compilation to be more dynamic and perform analysis only on the code parts that changed, etc. So it's pretty faster that way. Next, we'll talk about the documentation. Rust documentation is one of my favorite parts in the whole ecosystem, especially because there is a standard way enforced on how to write documentation, etc., so that it is common across any libraries, etc. And also, I think having this standardized tools made it very easier and to add documentation, and that is why we see a lot more docs in the Rust ecosystem. So we have a tool called Rust Doc that allows you to generate documentation from code. So documentation in Rust goes hand in hand with code. So all your documentation is also annotated on top of the code, so that so that you don't have to do it separately, etc. So using Rust Doc, you essentially can generate a markdown site. You can generate a site with a UI actually of all that data. So triple dash is used as a syntactic sugar for the the doc attribute, which is used to write documentation for any type, function, etc. We'll see an example. So here we have a struct and a implementation with two functions. So each type or attribute is essentially annotated with the 3/ with the comment essentially. So first for the person struct, we have a comment called a human being is represented here, and also for the fields inside it. Inside the implementation of the person, we have two functions, new and hello. For the new function, we not only have an explanation but also arguments and examples. So all these comments follow the markdown format so that you can use so that it is easier. So next we'll see. So once you have this code with these types of annotations and you run cargo docs, you essentially get this output. So this is the final HTML site that cargo docs generates with all the type data, etc., with the comments. All the comments are now converted into a documentation, which is pretty awesome to look at and pretty useful too. Obviously, documentation is awesome. So next we'll talk about the compilation. There is not much to talk about the compilation, especially because we don't have much time. But there are like a lot of configurations that you can use. So for example, cargo. If you run cargo build, it builds your code and outputs the binaries or the object formats into the target folder. If you are doing the release profile, etc., they are present in the respective folders. Next we'll talk about the testing. So in Rust, you have two ways of writing tests: the unit test and integration test. The unit tests they lie in the same source directory itself, but for the integration test, you have to put them in the test directory instead of the SRC, especially because you want to be able to test your code like an external consumer uses it. Like if a package is a library, you want to test it in a way that a binary uses it. So it helps you by having them in the test folder. It helps you do that. Once you have those tests, every test is attributed with the test attribute, so that whenever you run cargo test, it recognizes what all functions are tests and runs them as a binary and outputs the results. So for example, here we have a module with a function called itworks, and both of them are annotated with the test path. The first annotation, it's a configuration format. So if it is not a test, it's not compiled into. That is pretty good. So we have a test called itworks, and the test passes. So whenever you run cargo test, that test is run and the output is reported. There are arguments for here too on running specific tests, etc. Next, we'll talk about package management. Rust package management is a pretty awesome overall. It's a pretty full-fledged package tool. The by cargo management, by package management, we are obviously talking about cargo. So cargo is a pretty full-fledged tool, as we have seen previously. We have been using it for various things. So first we'll talk about the dependency management. Cargo is more than a package manager, but it's focused as a package manager. The main important use case is being as a package manager. So what is cargo? Cargo allows you to manage dependencies and have repeatable builds. It does this by having two metadata files that called cargo.toml and cargo.log. In the cargo.toml, which is user facing, the developer facing, you provide metadata about the package information, etc. The cargo.log is used by the compiler to maintain state of the project, etc. Cargo also introduces a package layout that you follow, source, test, etc. The ones we spoke about. That we follow essentially. Cargo, as we have seen previously, is also like an umbrella tool to do most of the operations like testing, docs, etc. So we'll see an example. Here we have a cargo.toml file for an example package, which with the dependencies time and regex. So whenever we do cargo build, these packages are fetched and built and linked with our library, so that our package, so that they work, so that our package can use them. Next, we'll talk about workspaces. As we have seen a cargo package previously, but there will be use cases where you want to have multiple packages in the same repository. This happens because as libraries are improved and added features, you want to have multiple. You may have divided your library into multiple of them, etc. So workspaces allow you to do that by having multiple packages fetched together. Workspace allows you to group multiple packages. This is done by having a workspace section in the cargo.toml file. All the packages in a workspace share the same common cargo.log and output directories essentially. Next, so this is an example. Here we have a workspace which includes all these members, tracing, etc. These tracing, etc. are packages essentially. They can be binary or library crates. Next, we'll talk about features. One of my favorite features in Rust is the compile time feature flag. So Rust compile time feature flags allows you to affect the compilation essentially. So if you consider, for example, I'm the owner of a library and I want to offer multiple variants of my library. For example, here I want to offer a variant where I take a dependency on std, where I don't take a dependency on the standard library, the std library. So whenever this is important for me because I want to allow the users of my library to not have to take dependency on std because I'm taking a dependency. So I want to offer a variant of my library where I'm not taking a dependency on std. This is useful for embedded systems, etc. Right? So feature flags allow you to have for library authors to offer multiple variants of their libraries. For example, they can offer a variant where there is no dependency on pretty printing, etc. So first, the important thing to note is that a feature is a package is either an optional dependency or a set of other features. So now we'll see an example. So here we have a crate. This is taken from the tracing crate. So first, in the dependency section, we can see that we take a dependency on the lazy static, and it is optional because we have optional equal true. So now in the feature section, we have two, elec and std. In the std feature flag takes a dependency on lazy static and elec. Lazy static internally depends on it's a crate and it depends on std internally. So because we're taking a dependency on lazy static, we have to the users of my crate have to take a dependency on std. If it wasn't for the feature elec, where we are not taking a dependency on lazy static. If you see the feature section, elec doesn't take a dependency on any library essentially. So it can be used in embedded systems, etc. where you can't use where you can't take a dependency on std library. So we will see how it does. So you can ask me how is my crate able to offer two variants? How is the code part separated essentially? So this is done by using the CFG attribute. By using the CFG attribute, we can have multiple implementations of the same code. Like for example, here we have the implementation of inner module. In the first case where we annotated with feature equal to std. So This is included when the feature STD is enabled. And in the second case, not feature STD. So this happens when the STD is not enabled. So based on this, you can separate code paths to do the same thing, but with a different dependency, or without that dependency, in a more hard format for you, or like that. So the consumers of this library will specify that feature flag with like this. So in their binary or crate, they depend on the tracing core package, and they first disable the default features because they don't want to opt into the default feature. They disable the default features and they enable the elec features equal to elec. So they have manually specified that they want the elec variant of our library, so that we are not taking it, so that they want the variant where there is no dependency on lazy static. So this is awesome because it allows you to have multiple variants of the package to support a lot of to support multiple use cases, right, in embedded systems, etc. Next, we talk about binary management. Cargo tool is also very extensible in itself. So you can use Cargo to essentially run external binaries too. This is done whenever you run Cargo and a binary name. First, it checks with with its own subcommands. If it's not present, it expands it into Cargo dash with that tool name. So this means that Cargo in itself is expandable by its own. So how is this possible? So this is further easier. This is further made easier by having the Cargo install command, which can be used to install binaries from crates.io. So by using Cargo install, you can install binaries too from crates.io. Here these binaries are installed into home/.cargo. So here we will try to install the Cargo expand binary, which is present in crates.io. So whenever you do Cargo install Cargo expand, the Cargo expand tool is installed, and when we do Cargo expand without the dash, that tool is invoked. The Cargo expand tool is a pretty awesome tool which expands your macros. This helped me immensely in learning Rust especially. Here, as you can see, the println function is expanded. So now let's talk about debugging. In debugging, first we'll start with logging, tracing, and then GDB. First, logging. In Rust, there is a crate called log, which provides a very simpler API with multiple log levels like debug, error, etc. that you can use to emit events, essentially. It abstracts over the actual log implementation. So for example, if your library is using the log crate, debug, etc., the macros from the log crate, there is no default implementation, logging implementation. So it does not emit events directly. So the consumer of the library, like it would be obviously it would be a binary, would enforce the logging implementation, which is used by itself and also all the dependencies of that crate. So essentially, the consumer can decide which logging implementation can use, and the logging library will just use the API. So as there is no logging implementation is specified, the overhead for the library is pretty small. Like you're just using the API with no forwarding, etc. So it also provides a very simpler API to have your own logging implementation to emit events into your data store, etc. So here we see an example. We are using the info warn macros from the log crate, and in the third line here we are using info to report communicating, yak sharing, etc. So you can use the log levels and emit events in your libraries or binaries, essentially. And the logging implementation is specified in the init file or in the main file. You can use the log setlogger function to set the logger, essentially. The logger is the implementation that all the info macros, etc. would send the events to, essentially. If your project is a library, you would not set this, and there'll be no emits because you're not able to run the library on itself. Once you use that library as a dependency in another binary project, there you'll use that function to set the logging implementation, which is enforced into all the dependencies like that. So here is an example of some logs that was instrumented using the log crate. It's a very simpler logs, I guess. Next, we'll talk about tracing. So as you saw, the logs are pretty simple and pretty hard to comprehend, essentially, because all it was showing is an event. There is no contextual information. Tracing allows you to have contextual information, like scoped contextual and structural diagnostics in your libraries or in your project, essentially. It is more than a logging library, but provides the same simpler API for consumers. it introduces a new primitive called span, which represents a period of time essentially. Like performing a function is a span essentially. You started and then you ended with some result, etc. Like that. And these spans can also have parent spans essentially. Like for example, a function span has multiple subspans where some subtask is completed and things like that. So this provides a very nice primitive to build things like distributed tracing instrumentation or for asynchronous systems like Tokyo, etc. So for your libraries, you don't have to change a lot to use tracing. Essentially, you replace the log trace with the tracing, and then everything should work directly with the same API as they both use the same APIs essentially. And as we saw, as I mentioned, the spans, the parent spans, etc. Spans lifecycle in general. Here we are instrumenting the connect to function with a instrument attribute, which essentially means that it will emit a span automatically once the span is started, and it'll close the span once the function is ended. So and all the trace events, etc., that are happening inside, all the inside spans that are emitted are essentially child spans to the function span essentially. Now this will produce more conceptual logs like this. For example, here we have the load function, which essentially has multiple sub events: handling request, error, unknown literal. So this means that there is more contextual data added to your logs rather than a single log message that is very hard to comprehend on which life cycle it has, and things like that. Next, we talk about the debugging. JNU debugger, JNU project debugger. JNU project debugger allows you to understand what is going on inside the project while it executes. It allows you to have breakpoints in your program and then have you check variables or have call stacks, etc. to retrieve runtime information essentially. It has support for multiple languages like C, C++, etc. There is also Rust GDB, which is a wrapper around GDB to provide pretty printers specific to Rust for strings, etc. to provide more easier for more easier understanding. Here we have the same similar program that runs in a loop essentially. Uh, Here we use the GDB tool. Once you compile that, we have to compile that in debug mode to get the symbols out. You can also have, but if you want to do the same in the release target, essentially you can enable debug equal to true in the cargo.toml and you'll get the symbols in your binary, and then you will run the binary using the GDB command, wrapping that command into GDB. Once you do that, GDB, and then you can GDB provides an interface for you to interact with it. So essentially, we did B8, which means that we are setting a breakpoint at line 8, and then we are running the program using the R command. Once you do that, the program is running till the eighth line, and then it break the eighth line, and it is taking input. Essentially, we can do p count, etc. We are printing the variable count here, and it is 3 here. So as you can see, GDB allows you to have runtime information, runtime querying capabilities on what is happening in the runtime, etc. This is very useful to find hard bugs in runtimes, etc. GDB also provides like various other features. It's a pretty standard project for debugging in the Unix environments. So all these features should work well with Rust too. Thank you. Now I'll take questions.
Okay, thanks, Tarun, for quite informative talk. Yeah, it's covering, I say, a lot of areas, various topics than I expected, actually, to be honest. And it should be a good overview for the newbies, and it should be informative. Actually, it was informative to me as well. We are running out of time, and but I have one question. Actually, this question came from the chat. So, any UI front end to get to GDB you like to use?
So, I mean, I don't work on any complex systems like in daily manner. So I try to use GDB as much as I can. I mean, through the CLI itself. But I know that there are a lot of front ends to GDB that you can use. So I'm not sure I can add anything here. Sorry, sorry though. Uh,
Okay.
like one other thing that I wanted to end my talk with is that I mean we covered a lot of things. So if you are intimidated, if you have not understood anything, please don't feel intimidated. Like there are good resources online, like the Rust book, the Cargo book. There are books for everything, and feel free to check them out to make sure your understanding is correct or confirm your thinking. There are great resources online for sure.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we have a lot of good documents online.
Yep.
Okay, thanks again for a good presentation. And well, next session starting in 10 minutes. See you
Awesome.
later. Okay.
Yep. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Abraham.